Hello, welcome to this evening's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments. We will explore Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills topics in Algebra 1 with TI-Nspire technology. I see that many of you are joining us for the first time, so we'd like to offer a special welcome if this is your first T-Cubed Professional Development webinar. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus near Pittsburgh, where I use TI technology to make tough to teach, tough to learn concepts accessible to all students. I'm very happy to introduce our two panelists tonight, Blake Helm and Andy Parr. Blake Helm is a facilitator of mathematics with Tyler Independent School District and research fellow at Stephen F. Austin University. He holds a master's in school mathematics teaching from Stephen F. Austin University. Now in his 12th year as an educator, Blake has also taught elementary and middle school. Thanks for being with us, Blake. And Andy has been working in math education since 1999. She has taught pre-algebra through AP statistics. Although starting her teaching career in South Carolina, she now currently lives in Central Texas. Her current role is a math specialist, working with middle and high school math teachers. Andy's desire is to continually support teachers in effectively incorporating technology into their classrooms. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
I'm glad to be here.
We are expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free to send questions to all panelists using the Q&A window on the right section of your screen. We'll also send general messages in the chat window. Once we move to the teacher software, the right section of your screen will be replaced with a green floating toolbar. You can access the Q&A window by clicking the question icon. This session is being recorded, and as a reminder, we will provide a link to the event certificate of attendance at the conclusion of the webinar. Once the recording is available, if you'd like to follow along with your handheld or software, and we really hope you will, we recommend doing this with the recording. That way you can download the activities and then pause and rewind the recording as necessary. We don't expect you'll have any audio issues tonight, but in the event that you do, try selecting Communicate in the WebEx menu, choose Audio Broadcast, and then click Join. At this point, Blake is going to discuss our agenda.
Well, thanks, Mike. As Mike has mentioned, he's already welcomed everyone, and so I would like to say welcome to everyone as well. Tonight, we're really going to be focusing on some standards and some activities that relate to Algebra 1, and also a couple of things that relate to 8th grade, because as most of us from Texas know, we have a new set of standards for kinder through 8 this year, and then next year we will have some new standards for Algebra 1. So we're going to be looking at about 4 different activities tonight, and those are listed right there where it says inspired activities: definitions of functions, verb to visual, linear inequalities in 2 variables, and exploring domain and range.
Thanks, Blake. And Andy is going to discuss our expected outcomes.
Our goals for this evening is we're going to look at how the Nspire technology can help our students facilitate that application, and really looking at those process standards to represent, analyze, and solve linear. We're going to look at the linear equations, inequalities, and systems. TI has the free TEKS-aligned activities. And then we're going to look at the Nspire technology to give the students those tools to help them build their understanding. We're again looking at those Algebra 1 concepts, and then helping, of course, help them build their success with STAAR, the end of course assessment. And with all of that, staying in touch with the social media and the upcoming events.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Blake, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to start off tonight just talking about really something that has actually been moved down from Algebra 1 and will be showing up in 8th grade starting this year, but it's still very important to this year's current standards for Algebra 1, and it's also a very important mathematical topic in general, and that's the idea of understanding what a function is by definition. And so I've got a couple of documents I'm going to just kind of talk about briefly. This document that you see right now is the 8th grade mathematics STAAR blueprint. And beginning this year, this is what the blueprint for the state assessment will look like. As you can see right here in reporting category 2, there are 22 questions that will come from that category. Are you not seeing it?
We can't see it yet.
Can we have you share your desktop, I think, Blake?
Oh, yeah, I apologize for that.
No problem.
How about now? Is that better?
There.
Okay, so here's the blueprint. Essentially, what I was mentioning was the fact that this is a really big reporting category for 8th grade. And within that reporting category, on the assessed curriculum document, we have this standard right here, which is 8.5G, identify functions using sets of ordered pairs, tables, mappings, and graphs. And so the first activity that we're going to showcase tonight addresses this standard, but it also addresses the current algebra standard of 8.1D, which is represent relationships among quantities using concrete models, tables, graphs, diagrams, verbal descriptions, equations, and inequalities. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this activity. We can find this activity. I'm actually in the teacher software for Navigator, and I'm in the content workspace. I'm just going to click right here under web content where it says Math Inspired, and this is actually a middle grades math activity. So under subject, I can filter it to math and go to middle grades math, and this is in the section titled functions. Okay, so this activity is titled definition of functions. And when I select the activity here, if you'll notice down here under the files window here in the content workspace, you can see the TNS file, which is your file for the Inspire software and the Inspire handhelds, and then also the student document, the PDF, and the teacher document. So let's go ahead and open up the student document first. While that's loading, I will go ahead and load the TNS file as well. There it is. All right. Let's dim this a little bit more so that everyone can see it. And what I want to emphasize here is that this is, of course, the student document, as I mentioned. And the idea being with this activity really is centered around being able to make a determination as to whether or not a relation is in fact a function based on the definition right here, okay? So a function is defined as a relationship between two sets of numbers where each member of the domain is paired with only one member of the range. Let's take a look at what students are actually doing in this activity. I'm going to go ahead and open up the TNS file now. And let me magnify my window just a little bit. This is the title page for the activity, and it gives the students directions, of course. So it says on the following page, it shows a grid and a table, and then the directions for the students on what to do with this grid and the table are actually on the student worksheet. So let me make this so that things are not jumping around quite as much. Okay, so this is the actual page that in the Nspire activity that the students will utilize. And essentially what they do is they use their trackpad to click and to drag points onto the coordinate grid. And as they do, the mapping starts to show up over here in this input-output diagram. And they continue to do that until all points are on the page. And it actually gives them on the student page, it gives them specific points to drag to. So it has them drag to 0, 1. And it has them drag to 1, 2, and so on, 2, 4. I'll place one more of those coordinate points on there. Okay? And then, using these are actually slider buttons in the activity. So points are showing up down here, and they can use the slider button to actually do a function test. And in this case, it passes the function test. And so this is a good way for students to begin to explore the idea, explore the definition of functions. What I'd like to ask everyone are, what are some guiding questions that you might ask students if you were doing this activity with them, whether it be you're modeling this for them using your teacher software, or if they are doing this activity as individual students on their handhelds? What are some guiding questions that you can ask to really get at and deepen their understanding of the definition of what a function is? And you can go ahead and respond to that via the chat.
And we'd like your input, so we'll go ahead and feel free to chime in the chat window. And
I'll go ahead and do a couple of things and show you some of the other features of this particular activity. So we've already tested that function. Now, there's a button at the top that will allow us to reset this, or allow the students to reset it. And so if we are dragging these points and we generate a relation that looks like this, and we conduct a function test, this does not pass the function test. And the graphic that they're using, of course, in the coordinate grid is the vertical line test. But what I really like about this particular representation over here, using the mappings, is that it really helps students to understand that definition, that a function is defined as a relationship between two sets of numbers where each member of the domain is paired or corresponds to exactly one value in the range. Okay? So I have another discussion question. How does this activity relate to those standards that I mentioned, whether it's the Algebra 1D or the 8th grade, the new standard for 8th grade, which is 8.5G. How does this activity, how does it relate to those standards? So there was a question that says, how does the mapping reflect a function relation? Well, in this case, it doesn't, because by definition, a function means that for this one value of our input, we get exactly one output. If we were to change this or if we were to change it to look like this, then this, in fact, would be a function. 2 corresponds to 3. 3 corresponds to 3. That, by definition, is a function.
So you don't have to necessarily reset it. Even you can move the points about without resetting the whole page.
You do not. Correct. You don't.
Okay.
Good point. How can you formatively assess a student's understanding regarding the concept of what a function is using this activity? What are some things you could do to formatively assess and be able to guide the instruction with this activity?
So Mark has put into the chat box that there are multiple representations in the file, and identifying the functions in the order pairs, tables, mappings, and graphs, and having them compare and contrast the functions and the non-functions.
That's an excellent point. Multiple representations is extremely important. It has been for quite some time, and with our new standards, it's becoming even more important at even earlier grades. So that's a very, very poignant point there.
And Kayla's talking about showing examples and explaining the differences. I know for some of my students that having the color makes the difference, the corresponding colors.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have another question I would like to ask before we leave this activity, and that is, suppose that you asked this question of your student. Is that a function? And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the function test. If I were to take a point and place it directly on top of another point, is that a function? What type of responses would you hope to hear from your students in that discussion? Okay. A couple of people have responded to some of the previous questions. Mark mentioned formatively assessing by asking students to make a non-function relation. Of course, that's always important to do that. Have them make the non-examples. All right. So let's go on to the next activity. And I'm gonna let Andy kind of take over, and I'm gonna drive. How about that?
I think it sounds good. Thanks. Well, the next one that we want to look at is we'll start with the standard, and we're going to look at our algebra text in A to C. And in A to C, let's give you just a minute. We're looking at still the foundations for functions and the using the properties and attributes of functions, or interpreting the situations and giving graphs and creating the situations to fit those graphs. So, and you'll notice there that it's a supporting standard. That all being said, it's still a real important one, and I think we would agree that a lot of times our students, sometimes they're struggling with interpreting graphs and then creating those situations and reading those graphs. And so when we look at this, we're still going to go back to our software and go into that content tab. And then this one we still can pull that from that middle grade topic, although it still fits with our Algebra 1 material. And so if we pull it from there, the TNS file is called verbal to visual. And when we do that, it's called, again, that verbal to visual. We're going to start with the student pages. So if we start with that student page, then this has 4 different situations with it. And with each situation, it gives you a problem situation, and then from there, where the students are asked to create a sketch, in essence, sketch a graph that fits the scenario. So we're going to look just at problem 1, and in problem 1, we're restricted to the first quadrant. So we have a bathtub, and in this bathtub, it holds 150 liters of water, and then we begin draining at a constant rate. After 3 minutes, you put the plug back in and remove all the bathtub toys, because, well, that's just important, because we really don't want them to go down the drain. That takes about 30 seconds for that to happen, and then after that, we remove the plug again and let the tub empty. That takes another 2 minutes. And so we ask our students, what is that graph going to look like? Give them a moment to ponder, have them underline what's the important information in all of that, sketch it, and then sketch it on the Nspire. So let's open up the Nspire file, the TNF file. And so if we do that, Blake, if you'll help me out there.
Okay, so you want me to draw this for you?
If you would, please. So there we go. All he's doing is grabbing the red dot. I'm going to move it to, we need to start at about 150. Now, here's the trickiest part about this particular file. We need to turn the drawing feature on. So if you go up there where it says draw, that gray arrow, if you click it on, if you would please, it turns white. It's a little backwards, I know, it's just the way it is. So now the draw feature's on, so we need to, and now we're going back in that academic vocabulary. We need to let the water drain at a constant rate for how long? For 3 minutes. So grab the dot, grab the point, there you go. Grab it for 3 minutes at a constant rate, however that constant rate looks. So after 3 minutes, so then we're going to stop for 30 seconds. So pull out the bathtub toys. And then after 30 seconds, go back to a constant rate for another 2 minutes until the tub's empty. That was a fabulous sketch, Blake. Thank you. Okay, you'll notice again, we can't erase it. It's a sketch. It's all we need to do. And then now we're going to show the function. So click that slider on. That was a nice job. That was good. Will all of your students' sketches look like exactly like that? Probably not. But therein lies the question of what will it look like? What will your students look like? And what sort of discussions can you have? What sort of academic vocabulary can you have with your students, and what their graphs will look like, and what would you deem acceptable and not acceptable? And that's a question that I pose to the group. What sort of questions or conversations would a problem like this pose? And if it didn't match exactly, would your students assume that it's incorrect? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
You know, one of the things that I like to ask with activities like this is, how do we determine how right or how wrong the answer or the graph is? How close is it? How do we know that it's close? Because the goal really is not to completely draw the graph exactly. The goal is to be able to understand what's happening in this situation and be able to give a reasonable model.
Right. And Mark, I completely agree with you. I think some people confuse, some of our students confuse constant rate with horizontal line, or if their constant rate's different than my constant rate, then we have to be wrong. Or if it's not the exact constant rate is the right answer. So do we have a good conceptual understanding of what that means? And so, or yeah, in this case, that we give our y-intercept as 150, but in the other problems, not necessarily. So giving that, and same thing, Kathy, of could the fear of being wrong, but can you defend what you wrote? And does it match the situation? Is it translated up or down? So that's one of the reasons that we chose this problem, because you're able to pull in all the vocabulary in these 4 problems. And we were curious on your thoughts on the matter. Does it fit the standard?
And while you're thinking about that, this is Mike Houston. I really like Kathy's comment earlier that many of her students are afraid to try and possibly be wrong. And I'm guessing a lot of people have that same situation. I was thinking you could also use the chat window and fill that with any ideas that you have or ways that you use to sort of get students to the point where they can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, because I think that's pretty important.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that's one of the benefits of the technology, and this is an example of how the technology can help overcome that, because really with the click, there's something about when we do something with pencil and paper, or especially, you know, with pen and paper, there's this permanency to my response. And even though I may be able to do it over, for some kids, that permanency of you know, having that on paper and you know, if it's incorrect, they do have some apprehensions with that. But with this, with the click of a mouse or the click of a trackpad in the case of the student handhelds, I'm able to erase it and try again. And I think that's important for us to help build that culture in our classrooms. And I think that this is another example of how the technology can help with that, just by simply having the capability with the click of a mouse to be able to wipe everything away and start over. If you know, if I'm off track, or if I'm not understanding things completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
So how does this connect to the standard? Interpret situations in terms of given graphs, or create situations that fit given graphs.
I know Melanie mentioned that you can ask students to tell what the line is doing and introduce the term decreasing.
Very, very much so. Go ahead.
Yep, I was just going to mention that. That was a previously asked question, but I want to make sure that got mentioned.
All right. Do you want to move on to the next activity?
Sounds good.
Okay, let's do that. The next activity is going to address really a couple of standards, and we're going to kind of stay right in this. Actually, I'm going to scroll down, And for those of you, just kind of to remind you, this document is actually from TEA. This is the assessed curriculum document that we're viewing the standards on. So these are the actual standards that are assessed on the EOCs. If we look at Algebra 7, B, and C, these standards right here: investigate methods for solving linear equations and inequalities using concrete models, graphs, properties of equality, select a method and solve the equations and inequalities, and interpret and determine the reasonableness of solutions to linear equations and inequalities. This next activity is from the Algebra 1 Math Inspired. So I'm back in my content workspace and I'm going to navigate to the Algebra 1 content. And it's under the category of linear inequalities. And the title of this activity is linear inequalities in two variables. So let's pull up the student document first. Take a look at the student document. So we can see what the students are actually, the types of questions they're being asked and what they're really being asked to do here. In this document, they're going to be exploring linear inequalities. And they do that by dragging some points and moving them around. So, but if you'll notice here, they start off by moving a point P and then describing the change that occurs. What they're being asked to do here is observe. We take this point P, we drag it, we move it around. What is it that's changing? What stays the same? And then follow-up question of why do you think the line y equals x plus 1 is called the boundary line? And then from there they go into this table and they complete the table. So let's take a look at the actual TNS file for this activity. So the instructions are pretty simple on the title page, and it just informs them to drag the point to different parts of the coordinate plane. And so they click and drag this point, and as they do, notice what's happening with the regions. Those regions are becoming shaded, and likewise the boundary line, the attributes of the boundary line are also changing. And along with that, down in the bottom here, the equation itself changes from an equation to an inequality depending on the location of the point. And so students in this activity they can really place the point anywhere they want, and they're just being asked to observe what happens with the graph as they do that. But along with that, they should also be paying attention to the representation down here. Then once they respond to the questions on the student answer document, they're asked, there's a couple of questions here that they follow up with on page 2. And on this page, they are actually working with some sort of inequality or equation down here. And so they can toggle using these buttons over on the side and change this relationship from an equation to an inequality, and even have where it's greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, less than. And as they do so, notice the graph changes as well. And so, I didn't mean to do that. Hold on just a second. So as we move the point around, the idea is to find a place on the graph, point on the graph, that satisfies whatever this is down here, whether it's an equality or an equation. And hopefully, the students realize that in order for us to satisfy the equation, the point has to be on the line. Now, the student activity does direct them through specific steps on what to do. And they actually walk them through step-by-step different situations to help build that understanding. So my question would be, what additional guiding questions could you ask students with this activity to deepen their understanding of 8.7b and 8.7c? What types of guiding questions could you ask your students when they are doing this activity that will help deepen their understanding of 8.7b and 8.7c? Let's take maybe a minute to respond. Andy, do you?
I'd say I know for some reason many students struggle with inequalities, and I think the boundary line for some is that point of confusion. And so I think in this activity it really highlights that boundary point. It's not just the shaded region, but also that boundary line of what that boundary line means.
Absolutely.
And absolutely, Caleb, pointing out what are those differences between the solid and the dotted line and what the shading represents. So we talk about, and our students and all of us, I know sometimes we talk about what shade here, but really what does that shading mean? And I'm not saying that is an all-inclusive, but what do we mean when we shade? So
I think one of the things that is very helpful in this activity is the fact that there are several different situations that the students can investigate on the same screen. And so one of the questions that I would ask would be maybe to give them a point and have them, or a coordinate, and have them locate that point. And then ask, how could you make this false? And see what they could come up with. Because you might have some kids that do this. It didn't work. Oops, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, Blake, I don't think you're going to be able to edit.
It's not editable.
That field, right. But what you can do outside of this activity itself, you could create just this page pretty easily, just starting a brand new document. And I like what you're trying to do. You're trying to ask them to change one attribute and see what what stays the same, what changes.
Yeah.
Yep. So without the slider on the left-hand side, you can pretty easily create this page, just so everyone knows.
Yeah. But it's always good to ask those types of questions. What could you do to make this true, or what could you do to make it false?
Right.
All right. Do we have time for one more activity?
I think we do.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we do. All right, let's look at, for our last one, let's look at Tech A to B. And then we're going to still look at that attributes and properties of functions. And now we'll be looking at the domain and range and determine reasonableness of domain and range, both continuous and discrete. And so again, domain and range, a big topic. There are a couple of domain and range activities in Math-Inspired. We're going to look at domain and range 2, and we're just covering all sorts of areas. So where the domain and range 2 activity is actually found in the Algebra 2 section. So go again in your content tab under Math, under Algebra 2, and then it's, I forget which category it's in, under Functions and Relations. And then there's domain and range 2. So you'll notice a trend here. We'll start with the student document first. So as we open up the student document, what is very appealing about this particular activity is it does go, it starts with discrete, and so it starts with, on the first page, starting with moving just a point, and there's discrete points around. Then it moves through, as you fill out a table, moves through lots of different pages, and then we are actually, let's go ahead and open up, if you would, the TNS file, please, and so we can actually just see it. So again, it starts, yeah, let's start off, there it is on that first page. You can see that you're grabbing point P, and you can move it. We'll do a couple of them that you can move it along, and it goes just from point to point. And note what it's on your, as you're grabbing the points, you'll notice that the coordinates show up there on the bottom. And you'll also notice that what's showing on the X and Y axis, that it's color-coded. If you'll go ahead and move to the next page, we're not going to move point P on this one, but so we have it in that form. I'm really interested in moving to 4.1 though. So if we move point P along this one, yeah, go ahead. If we move point P along this particular function, and I just like the way that it highlights it. And then back in the other direction. Oh. And then it keeps going. Oh, would you move it back towards the origin, please? Why didn't I highlight all the way up there? There it goes. So it shows both the, it shows the maximum, it shows all along that function, and it also is highlighting the domain and range and color coding along with the point as you move that point along, the coordinates there at the bottom along point P. So, and as you'll see, you can see the thumbnails there on the left, that it has all sorts of different ones. And if you would, please go ahead and look at that problem 3 at 3.1, because you also have the piecewise as well. So we're looking at all sorts of different ways that we can look at domain and range. And so the question becomes is, would this help your students understand domain and range? What do you see it, what helps them see it in maybe a different way? Does the color coding help? I agree, Mark. Step functions, absolutely, yes. as we move to our new standards in Algebra 1 next year, we are going to want to write, just one second, we're going to write in Algebra 1 using inequalities, and in Algebra 2 using interval and set notation. So in Algebra 1, we're still going to want to use the inequalities, but then when we move to Algebra 2, that's when we're going to want to write it in interval and set notation. So this will still be an excellent activity for Algebra 1. And then again in Algebra 2, we're just changing we're not changing, but we're amplifying the way in which we write the domain and range.
So what are some questions that you could ask with this activity to deepen your students' understanding of A to B?
I would agree, color coding helps.
I do too.
Color coding helps me.
It's very powerful for a lot of students to be able to see and make the distinction with the color coding. It's a very powerful visual representation.
And then on the first several pages, I think it's the first 5 problems, the function is already provided for you. And then if you move to problem 6, if you'll move down on the TNS file, then to there you go. It asks you to move the segment to satisfy the following condition. So you're given a condition, and then you're asked to create that problem, and then what does it look like under those conditions? So it's asking them in both directions. So again, the goal is, do you have the depth of understanding to support? And I believe that does that even on the next page as well.
What are those conditions? Let's see. I guess I was doing that for the other one.
So my question to you is, if any of you have used this in your classroom with your students? And what sort of questions did you ask in your classroom? And how did your students respond?
Andy, while we're waiting for hopefully some answers, I definitely used this recently. I used it last week. And on this particular page, I gave my students, they work in groups of 4, and I gave my students in each group of 4 a different domain that they had to restrict to. Again, you can move those endpoints. But what I think they thought was kind of cool is that they could all have different ranges and still meet the requirements of that domain. So I think that kind of hit home, is that all 4 students could have a different range, but still keep that domain.
Fascinating. Interesting. Very cool.
Okay.
All right.
Well, Mike, you want to tell them about some of the up and coming events? Are there any
Absolutely.
other questions about these activities, any of the activities, before we hand it back over to Mike? You know, our goal tonight really was to show you some activities that are pretty strongly, in our opinion, pretty strongly aligned to some pretty important standards here in Texas. And hopefully we've been able to do that. But before we leave them, are there any other questions that you have about any of these activities that you've seen tonight? So the question came up, these are all available through the TI website. Yes, absolutely they are. For convenience sake, and also really to kind of showcase the capability of the Navigator and the teacher and student software for that matter. We've been accessing all of the math-inspired content through the software, but you can also download these from the website under Activities, go to Math-Inspired, and you'll look them up by course. So those 2 activities that we did at the beginning, both of those were from middle grades math, and they were actually both in the functions category. You can see there's the activity for definition of functions, and there's the verbal to visual. And the other activity, the one that was from Algebra 1, the linear inequalities in 2 variables, that's located in the Algebra 1 course, and then this one that we've been looking at and exploring with domain and range is in Algebra 2. So yes, all of the content that you've seen tonight is available on the website.
So you can access it either through what other software or through the website, whichever you prefer.
Yes. Okay, Mike, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Blake and Andy.
Absolutely.
And I think as both of them said, if you think of any questions over these last few minutes here, please feel free to use the chat window and let us know what those questions are. I know they're going to try and get those questions answered live. I do want to share a few things that we have going on this fall. It seems that there's a lot of things going on right now that I want to make sure you're aware of. I know earlier on, I think one of the first chats we had was from Mark, and I think he chatted that he said, "Howdy from beautiful Fort Worth, Texas, home of the next T-Cubed International Conference on March 12th to the 15th, 2015. So I do want to mention that the T-Cubed Conference is coming to Fort Worth, Texas, and just through the chat window looking, it looks like we have a lot of people representing Texas tonight. So know that that's in your home state, and there's some really great early bird incentives right now. So let me share my desktop and take you to our website. So going to our website, education.ti.com. On the right-hand side, you can see 2015 T-Cubed Conference Special Pricing. And click on that, and then pricing. So through September 30th, the conference will only cost you $100, and then it seems to go up from there as time goes on. Blake or Andy, could either or both of you just talk a little bit about your experience at the conferences in the past, and also if you're going this year and what you might be planning to present?
I'll say that the T-Cubed conference is truly and honestly one of my favorite conferences to attend, but I learned more at the TCube conferences than more than any of the other conferences I attend, and I say that in all sincerity. I am going this year, and I plan on, if my proposals get accepted, then I'll be doing Inspires in the middle school classroom, and then also an 84C session.
Awesome. And Blake?
Absolutely. This is by far one of the best conferences that any mathematics or science educator can attend, for that matter, because at these conferences, it's really truly about connecting with others that are like-minded, that are doing really amazing things with handheld technology in their classrooms to help kids understand really advanced topics in very attainable ways. And so you will find that you meet people from all over the world, and I still have people that I speak to and are in contact with on a somewhat regular basis that I met through being involved with TCube and attending TCube conferences. I hope to be able to attend this year. I'm actually in a brand new position with my school district, but I'm hoping to be able to attend, and I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be able to present or not, but I hope to be able to be there since it is right down the road from us here in Tyler, Texas. So I hope to see you all there as well.
Thanks, Blake. Also on tonight is Rob Wilson, and I want to make sure I give him a due shout out. So on any of the pages on our website, at the very bottom, if you go down to Contact TI, and then in the middle is TI Sales Support. You slide down a little bit, there's Mr. Rob Wilson representing a lot of states, but including Texas. So Rob is a great person to know if you have any questions, if you're looking to acquire any new technology or would like any demonstrations. I know Rob is a great person to talk to about that. So please know that you can email him or give him a call at any time, and I know he'd be more than happy to help. So Rob, thanks so much for joining us tonight as well. We're early into our fall webinar lineup, and we have some really great webinars coming up. So if you liked what you saw tonight, again, know that there's many more to come this fall. So please be on the lookout. All of our webinar registrations are live for the entire fall series. So feel free to look through those and register for any that you feel you may be able to benefit from. Feel free to continue the conversation, anything you like and saw tonight. We would love for you to continue that conversation on some of our social media outlets. We are pretty active on all those. So again, any thoughts or comments, feel free to share those on some of those social media outlets. To get a certificate of attendance, go ahead and click the link in the chat window. That certificate contains the name, date, and duration of tonight's webinar. Also listed there is a link to the documents. So all the 4 activities that Andy and Blake used tonight, as well as my PowerPoint, are in that documents folder. If you happen to miss the certificate or the documents link, have no fear. In a couple of days, you'll get an email from us, and there will be a link to the recording, as well as a link to the certificate and the documents as well. So thank you so much, Andy and Blake, for showing us how TI-Nspire technology can help some really great Texas teachers align to the TEKS, especially in Algebra 1. So I really appreciate both of you sharing your time and your knowledge.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
And we really look forward to seeing everyone back online next week. Thanks so much.